tell him you sent me because I said
Yeah, totally,
because I'm very
totally.
obsessive. You know, I need to collect them all. I need to get all the Luises, all the. I need to get my like Mount Luis more. You know what I mean?
Yeah, totally. There's a Luis. There's also a famous Luis in New York named Luis Santiero, who's the famous Puerto Rican writer in New York, who is a playwright, and he's fantastic too because he's had this amazing history on the East Coast, which is
Now
amazing.
you're broadening my Luis horizons. I don't know.
Yeah, tell me about it.
I need to get my Mount Luis more first, and then I'll the Chicano
Word.
Luis. All right,
Yes.
we're joined live this hour by Luis Alfaro. Very very exciting. Making a little joke. We had Luis Rodriguez on. We had Luis Ure on. So we're collecting all the Luises and all the Luises of note. And this is really really exciting to be joined by Luis this hour. Again, this is one of the DAW signature series, speaker series. The DAW Center for the Arts is a not-for-profit in Pomona, California, and we service the Pomona and surrounding areas. And now the world's on the internet, we service the world. So we're really, really excited to be speaking this hour with the great Luis Alfaro. This is really, really exciting. He's a professor, a playwright, one of just really the great storytellers coming from our community and in this time. So, Luis, can you tell us? Let's start at the beginning. How did you get into it? How did you get into writing?
Well, I was born and raised in Pico Union in downtown Los Angeles, and in a very, very poor neighborhood, which was at the time in the 1970s really violent. And believe it or not, I used to keep a journal, and I kept a journal because I had there was an incident in my neighborhood where these gangs were fighting, and somebody got killed, and I wrote a report from my school. I must have been like fourth grade that said like interesting things happen in your neighborhood. So I wrote about this death, right? And my teacher was super, super disturbed and called me into the principal's office. My mom had to come. I got expelled for a week. I had to see a psychiatrist because I wrote in very frank detail, like everything that happened, right? And my parents are both from Delano, California, so farm workers. And my father always used to say to me when I was a kid, we bring to light that which is in the dark. That was part of the United Farm Workers movement. So I was a kid, but of course, I thought somebody was censoring me. I didn't have that language then, right? But somebody was telling me, you can't talk about the things that are going on in your neighborhood. So my mom gave me a journal book, and I've journaled ever since I was a little kid, and I still journal now. But like that first story was that first story where I thought that everybody didn't want me to tell the truth. And then that's kind of where it happened, that writing became the outlet for telling these stories about growing up Chicano in downtown LA, and also, about our people, but also about, the beautiful parts of our culture. And, I come from a migrant family. So, talking a lot about Mexico, talking a lot about like Central California, talking a lot about, different parts of our travels as a family. So
Yeah,
yeah, that's kind of the way the story started to emerge. Yeah.
yeah. So you talk about your family coming from, a lot of the series we've covered so far has been talking a lot of people about their journeys and like kind of like where they're from and how they write. But I'm really interested in this kind of idea. You're talking about your family coming from the Central Valley into LA, into Pico Union. Um, this kind of rural to urban migration, which is kind of the story of like the 20th century, right? For
Yeah.
not just Chicago, for like for everybody, right? So can you tell us, because it's almost like it's a story that begins before you were born. So how does the fact that your family comes from the Central Valley, move to Los Angeles, how does that inform you as a writer?
Well, definitely, I think I always feel like, when I first started writing, especially, I was a poet for 10 years exclusively, and then I was really exclusively in the performance art for another 10 years, and then I finally came into playwriting. So, when I was in poetry, I used to talk a lot about feeling that I had one foot on each side of the border, and sometimes the border was a kind of Mexico US, border, but also a border between California's, right, the north and the south, and also like class borders, right? And thinking a lot about those lines and sexuality. And so I guess, one of the things I think a lot about as a writer is how how this moving around kind of starts to define you. The so the city to the country in a kind of strange way was LA was about like the clusters when I was growing up. Everybody in my little Pico Union neighborhood was from Michoacan because that's where my father was from. So we really landed in a neighborhood that was everybody from that community, from Zamora, right? And then they would kind of pull the money resource together, do all of that stuff, right? And kind of create a solid little community. Everybody kind of worked at the same place, right? Everybody did kind of the same thing. Soccer was a huge part of my family life. So, you know, all of those Sunday trips to Oxnard and to, you know, Whittier and all those places were really, but you traveled with a lot of people.
Mm-hmm.
So I think, you know, when I think about it that way, I think that in some ways I was always traveling with the community. I was always traveling with the, you know, I had a lot of cousins too. I have a lot of, you know, and then just a kind of extended family that's not really related to me, but is from the region. So then in a kind of way, you kind of traveled in big migrations together. And I think that it didn't feel like I was going from the city to the country. It just felt like you were moving to another place to do work, right? To survive.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So yeah, that's definitely okay. So what how did you like transition though from writing poetry to like, okay, now I'm gonna write in longer forms? Like what clicked in your mind that maybe this was like
Mm.
um an avenue that could be open to you?
Well, I think, you know, when I just started writing, I just started to write. And then when I started to notice form started to tell me how I needed to write, right? So sometimes I would write and it was a kind of like a traditional poem. And sometimes I would write and it was something that was a little longer form. And then I started to notice I was doing a lot of readings in LA for years. I was doing a lot of readings all over the place. And the readings became more performative. Like that, you know, they were like slam poetry now, right? So you really are preparing something, you're memorizing something. It has a kind of theatricality to it. So performance art sort of entered my life, and I realized that that was a form, right, that I could really follow. And then, by luck, I started to study with a woman named Maria Irene Fornes, the famous Cuban playwright. And Irene came to town, and then, you know, that was another form. And I think what happens is, rather than trying to write towards a form, the form finds you. So for me, like what I call the alchemy of my writing, that kind of beautiful combination between like technique and craft and passion and desire, both of those kind of coupled together to me are really in playwriting for me. So I was always like, you know, I thought I was a pretty good poet. I loved it. I toured a lot and I opened for a lot of people. Marisela Norte and I did like, you know, we always read poetry together. But I think that I realized that my passion or my real gift for writing was in playwriting. And that was just because playwriting came to me versus I went out and found it. So I think, you know, even now, sometimes I'll write something and it's like, oh, this is really actually not a play. This is like a long form poem, or this is not this is a performance piece that's meant to be done this way. So I try to get out of the way of my own writing. And I don't know if people talk a lot about that, but for me, I try to not imagine that I'm the person dictating it, but that I'm actually kind of a channel for the writing. And my job is just to accumulate as much information and research and experience and spirit and all of that stuff and let the writing just happen. And that's when the writing gets really good, right?
Mm.
The writing gets great when you get out of the way of your own writing.
Right.
And in playwriting, it's super important because it's not your voice, it's another character's voice with all their realities.
Yeah. You mentioned though about like this kind of this combination of your passion on the one hand and your voice, like you literally how you sound on the other, like merging together. So that sounds to me like, yeah, you're getting out of the way of the writing, but then all of a sudden there's another individual that also lives inside your head, which is the editor, the writer.
Yeah.
So can you talk a little bit about that process? Because I think oftentimes, because I mean, I have a kind of similar idea. I have a similar approach to poetry where it's like, is it, people say that all style, no substance. And I get that, whatever, but like that's disrespectful to style. You should have style and substance. I mean,
Right.
you should not,
Right.
you should
Right.
really, the people need to work a little more on their style. But that's neither here nor there. But can you speak a little bit to that? To like, you know, okay, so you have these ideas, you catch the spirit, but then you got to like make that legible, right?
Well, here's the thing. I think my job is to be a student all my life, right? That's what I feel like. I teach, but in truth, I'm learning, right? I feel like, you teach what you need to learn in a way too. So I'm always active in the classroom. But I would say that when I'm creating work, my only job is really to research. My only job is to get as full, to fill the vessel, which is me, with as much information as I can. So I become the authority of whatever the thing is I'm going to write. And then when I say I get out of the way, I get out of the way because, I already come with some tricks, right? I come with some skill. I've been writing for a while. I know how to tell a story, right? But my
Right.
job is not to my job is not to, I think that there's edits that happen that I think are really dangerous, right? That we call them the mother edits, right? What will they think of this? And so, I feel like there's this wonderful filmmaker, a Canadian filmmaker named David Cronenberg. I don't know if you know who he is. He wrote The Fly, and he's really wonderful. And he says, when I first write something, I have no societal responsibility whatsoever. It's just the deepest, darkest place inside of myself. When I present it, I have a social responsibility. And I kind of think along the same way. So when I'm writing, I say I get out of the way because I already have a muscle, right? I already have a muscle as a writer to write. But the thing itself is the thing that's kind of obsessing and brewing and sitting inside of me. But that's not like a little idea that I haven't explored. In some ways, I obsess about something so much that I go down these rabbit holes where I just read everything up on a subject, or I read about a character, or invent a backstory for a character. I do all of these exercises that are about discovering another person. And really, the weird part, the technical part is they're all me, right? I'm writing about me ultimately, or what I believe in, or what I want to, sort of transfer to the world. But I do think that there is a kind of beautiful, strange, magical thing that happens in writing where you fill up, you get full, you what is it? I kind of describe it that, right. When I get so full that then the only next possibility is for me to just vomit it all out. The next possibility is for me to just throw it out there, and then I shape it because I'm a technician, right? Because
Yeah.
I have some skill to it. But the shaping doesn't happen till way later. People talk a lot about like writing a play. I think you can write a play like in 6 weeks, but it takes a year to really write a play, because for me the art of writing is rewriting. It's about refining and getting to the essence of an idea, and really kind of like chipping away at something like maybe a sculptor might do. So I think for me that I love that, because that first moment of writing is just that I have something that I'm so obsessing about, or some desire to say something about the world, or some feeling that I have, that I just go down the rabbit hole of information. And all the information fuels and feeds something. And every play is a question that I have about the world. Every play usually has a kind of fact attached to it. So I usually run on a fact. So, I think that's kind of always fascinating to me, right? That I pick up some facts somewhere and I go, oh, okay. Wow, all right, let me just see what that's about, right? So I think a writer ultimately is full of inquiry. A writer is full of idea, and a writer is full of interest in the world. We're citizen artists, right? We're artists who are ultimately really interested in the world that we live in. We don't separate ourselves out from it, or at least I don't. So I really think of myself as a community artist, because I don't write alone ever. I always write in the presence of, around an idea that's very living in the world, right? I use what we call in our theater world dramaturgs, right? I use people, I talk to people, the specialists, the experts, the veterans, all of that. So yeah, in some way, I'm building on a connective thread and a connective idea. And that's how education and teaching and writing and inspiration all come together. I don't separate them out, right? I am part of a larger connective thread. There were a lot of really great writers before me, and there'll be many great writers after me. My only job right now is to tell you the story of today. That's my only job. It's a simple job for a writer. It's so complicated to do, right? But in some ways, that's my journey, man. That's my journey as an artist, right? To tell the story of today. I don't
Yeah.
worry about the past, and I don't worry about the future. I just worry about the moment that I'm in and what to do with the moment that I'm in. Yeah.
But you speak about what's to come, what's become before and what's coming after, right? So in addition to being this great writer and playwright and people nationally celebrate, you're also a professor, right? So you're also you're also pushing this knowledge forward. So what is it that you teach? What is it that you teach young authors?
Well, I don't, everybody says, oh, what kind of classes? I teach a lot of different kinds of classes, but ultimately, what I'm teaching is community building, right? What I'm teaching is I am passing on the ancient tradition to the next generation, and they can do whatever they want with it. My only job right now is just to pass on all of the history and to pass on the form and to pass on new idea and to create a space. What I talk about a lot is I create a space for an artist to follow their own excellence. They don't have to write any specific way to my liking. They have to just follow their own ideas, their own interests, their own inquiry. And I help facilitate or create these spaces of possibility where writers can discover themselves. Sometimes it's writers discovering themselves for the first time. I'm discovering that I'm a writer. Sometimes I work with writers who are like farther along in the field, who are on their journey. And these writers are really about exploring what it means to do the work they do and how to do it better, or what's stopping you from doing your work. So I'm a little bit of a technician in that way, but also a clinician in that way, in that I'm helping somebody figure out what's stopping them from writing, or what's the creative block, or anything along those lines. But I do think that when I teach a class, like I teach a playwriting one at USC, and I teach like I teach a Latinx theater history class, and those classes are really about, let me pass down all this information to you about what I think is really interesting. And I try to filter it in a way that's new and different. So one of the things I did this year, for instance, is I taught a class where I only showed the students work of their generation. So these are like people who are like 20 years old, right? So I only showed them the writers that are in their 20s. And that was a really great way of saying, like, there's already a community for you to belong to. There's already a world waiting for you. Do you want to join it, right? And what does it take to join it? Because there's a business part of it, of course, and there's a creative part of it. But what is the authentic you that wants to express yourself in writing? And how do you want to tell these stories, right? Because everybody's different. And so I try to show difference a lot. I try to show variety. I try to show all the different ways that form expresses itself in our culture. And I'm drawn to new. So for me, it's about, like, who are these avant-garde writers? Who are these writers that are in the field, that are pushing the field forward, whether in form, whether in culture, whether in community? What writers have we not heard from? What communities haven't we heard from? There's just an amazing Central American community that we should be embracing even further and bigger. We should talk about, Afro Latinx experiences. There's a lot to talk about, right? And so I think that in some ways, my job is just to open a door that pops something in your head that says, oh, there's a bigger world, and I could be part of that bigger world. And that's kind of what happened to me. I grew up in a very sheltered, very closed community that was about trying to stay alive. Both my parents worked multiple jobs, and we were just trying to get by. We were just trying to get by. So the idea of dreaming forward was not something that was afforded to us. It was not something that was like encouraged, right? What I was encouraged with that was that I was going to go work, and I started working when I was 13, and I never stopped working. I haven't stopped working since 13 years old. I worked in a carburetor factory in the city of Vernon, for God's sake. So like, in some ways, dreaming towards being an artist was not the thing that I was being pushed to, but all of the journey, all of that carburetor factory, all of that are the stories that I tell. Those are the rich stories, right? Those are the stories of amazing things that happen, right?
It's kind of funny. I mean, Vernon, man. My parents, they got divorced when I was young, but on one side I was in El Sereno, on the other side I was in Maywood, and I remember there was like right by where I was in Maywood, there was a little piece of Vernon. That's where the 100 people who live in Vernon lived, right?
Yes.
Because that's so they could stay incorporated or whatever. Oh man, yes. Vernon, Jesus.
Vernon was 26 in Santa Fe was where I was at.
Yeah.
And you know, I have a long history in El Sereno. I don't know if you know that.
No, well, I know. I saw you.
Yeah.
I saw. Okay, so I saw a confusing story because I saw it said like that you were that you grew up in Pico Union, but you went to Woodrow
Wilson
Wilson,
High
right?
School.
So were you in Woodrow Wilson before it got moved to like the area of the Hillside Village, or were you?
No, I was there in Hillside Village, and I was bused, and we
Okay.
thought we were going to be
Busted.
bused to like a white school,
They
and they
just busted.
bused to Chicano school. But to be honest, you know, I still
Yeah.
talk about it because it was kind of extraordinary. My brother and I grew up in downtown LA, and we grew up like on listening to K-Day. I went to Berendo Junior High, which is down on Pico in Vermont, and you know, we grew up like around mostly black kids, right? So when we got to Wilson, my brother was a year ahead of me. When we got to Wilson, we were wearing like all the kids wore like corduroys, right? Like very Chicano. We were wearing like polyester, and we were wearing big tacones because we were like Superfly was our period. And we were completely culturally shocked. Like, I have to say that becoming a Chicano, I thought I was Chicano, but becoming a Chicano from East LA, it was like on the other side of the river was a whole other world. Because, you know, the Mexicans on this side were really kind of like leaning towards the Central American community hadn't fully moved in yet, right? But we leaned towards a different kind of expression. So it was very, very fascinating to me. But that was a cultural experience. And I just think it's hilarious that I was bused to a Mexican school
Yeah, yeah.
as a Mexican.
I kind of figured that, but I was like, that doesn't make any sense. So I was gonna leave it alone.
Yeah.
This story doesn't make any sense. I'm not gonna bust him. So
Yeah, but Hillside Village, like the sandwiches at Hillside Village, and you know, hanging out at Tops and Alhambra and Fosselman's, and no, that's like my yeah, Angelo's Pizza, and you know, on Valley. I mean, you know, all of that is like really a big part of my history.
was Charlie's Trio around yet?
Charlie's Trios, I've been to a million times. Yeah, I used to hang out on Maycrest and Lowell and yeah, all of those streets. So where did you grow up? Where in El Sereno?
Jones. I grew up in outside the village.
Oh, you're kidding me.
Yeah. Okay. So
Oh
did
my
you go
God.
up Soto?
Yeah, I go up Soto, and
So
then you know I had a
Soto, right? So you go up Soto, and then you go up. I can't remember the street right now, but there's like a little like liquor store right there, and then you go up to where Wilson is, right? So if instead of doing that, you made a right, like
yeah.
on the second wire, you'd end up on then make another right. You'd end up on Jones. That's where.
Oh yeah, so my one of my best friends is a woman named Laura Greenlee, who's a casting producer who grew up in the neighborhood. Richard Coca, who now works for Huizat as his spokesperson. Yeah, no, Hillside Village was a huge big part of my life. Yeah, this is very small worlds. Always, right? It's always that always. LA is like for the natives. LA is a really small town.
Yeah. And then, my grandpa would walk me down to Lincoln Park. I mean, because we were like right on the border, and we would like feed the ducks and all
Yeah,
that.
Lincoln Park. Lincoln Park was, yeah, we were always getting chased out by some cholos in Lincoln Park. Absolutely, that was my history.
I got spared that fate because I think it was walking my grandfather, and he had a lot of style.
Beautiful.
But earlier you mentioned something about it really resonated with me that that you want to encourage writers to be excellent in their own way, right? And so you know, oftentimes when I'm leading workshops, I talk about this idea of like, well, you got to develop a style, turn the style into discipline, and turn that discipline to a standard of excellence that you hold yourself to every time. And that's kind of like my way of saying it, right? But it's so funny that so many of the words that you're telling me are very, they resonate with me. So why is it important for writers to find a way to be excellent in their own way?
Because in some ways, I think the most important thing for writers to find their own authenticity, their own way of. I believe that each one of us already possesses an extraordinary poetry. The poetry of our people, the language of our people, the language of the street is the highest poetry, right? So it already exists. My job is to translate it, to interpret it, to channel it, right? Which is the spiritual way of describing this. My job is just to tell you the language that I speak, because in the language that I speak, in the language of my cousins, of my tias, of the way we traveled through Delano and up to Fresno, all of that, that language is rich and full and imagistic and already has its own rhythm. It already has its own power, right? So I don't need to I don't need to change it. I need to discover it and own it. And I think what happens early on in our careers is that we are imagining that we can be other people because we don't like who we are, right? For various reasons. For me, it was about class, right? I don't like being poor because I now equate poor with people not liking me, right? Or people not wanting us. But in truth, the language of the land is an extraordinary language, as Steinbeck taught us, right? As so many of so many great writers has taught us. And so for me, it's about helping you, that whoever you I'm going to be in a workshop with, discover what they already have and then polish that, because there's a lot of refinement to be had in your own language, right? So I love, there's a great Puerto Rican artist named Ricardo Levins Morales that says, yes, this is the language of our people is the highest poetry, but we have to be really critical of it. We have to also examine it. We have to understand it. And we also have to translate it through our bodies, right? So every story of mine is a story that's kind of lived through me, even if it doesn't feel like it's a story that belongs to me. So in the last 10 years, I've been doing these Greek adaptations that have been going around the country, right? And I wrote an Oedipus, it's called Oedipus El Rey, and it's about the prison system in California. And then I wrote a play called Electricidad, Electra, that is about girl gangs in downtown LA. And then I wrote a play called Mojada, which is the play that's kind of going around the country right now. And it's a Medea, and it's about the undocumented. So those are all different stories about me. Have I been in the state prison system? No, but I understand what it means to be trapped. And I understand what it means to not feel that I have any sort of an escape. And that's really what Oedipus is about, destiny or fate, right? Did Oedipus commit this terrible act because the society around him built a situation that he could not escape from? Or did he knowingly choose, you know, to create a terrible act? Which, these are like extraordinary questions of our culture now, right? Do we create cycles of poverty and violence in our community that don't allow people to escape, right? Why is it that more than half of all 17 to 24-year-old Californians who go to a state prison, why is it that more than half of them will go back at least once in their lifetime? Recidivism rate, right? Why do so many young men go back to prison? Because it's a place they know well, because it's a place of comfort, because they can't escape a system that's rigged to not let them succeed? What is it, right? And these are the questions that I think the Greeks, in their beautiful 1,700-year-old wisdom, still speak to us about, right? They still talk to us in that way. They still say, can you forgive? Why is it that we still exist in a culture that has trouble forgiving? It is revenge and a vengeance that destroys us as a community, as a family, as a culture, right?
And I want to get into these Greek adaptations, which definitely have I just have increased your already already rich legacy. But I first want to ask you about, tell us a little about this play, Gardens of Aztlan.
So this is a kind of little mini political play. So there's a theater in Costa Mesa
Mhm.
called South Coast Rep, and they've been very, very kind to me. They have commissioned me about 6 or 7 times, very, very generous to me, but they never produced me in their theater. So they finally commissioned me and said, we really want to do something. And we're doing these performances outside in a garden. So I was like, wonderful, but I'd rather be inside the theater because that's where the white people are always inside. And then all of a sudden they get an idea to put the Latinos outside, right? So I wrote this ridiculous play, and it's called Gardens of Aslan, and it's about the lady who makes the tortillas at El Torito, and she has escaped, and she's running through this garden, chased by the guys from In and Out. And so literally, it was guys dressed like In and Out guys, and the lady in the hole with her tortilla press running, and it was a huge hit. They ran it 2 seasons, and I mean, it was so ridiculous, right? But it was really kind of making fun of the theater too, because she's trying to get in the door and they won't let her in, right? And
Yeah.
so it was really about like, you can do something funny, you can make fun of people, and you can also question their motives at the same time. You can bite the hand that feeds you as long as the hand is having a very, very good time, right?
Yeah. So I want to talk to you about these plays, but the first thing I want to, before we do that, I've been having a series of these conversations with various people. Talked to one of the people was Tony Diaz. I talked to some of the people in the ethnic studies struggle. I've talked to people who are in the entertainment industries. I've talked to people who are acting. And there's this question that it seems our community is facing these kind of double oppressions, these twin oppressions of underrepresentation and misrepresentation. And it
Right.
seems like so many times in order to fight underrepresentation, we find ourselves compliant in misrepresentation, right? So how do we fight back against these two things simultaneously?
Well, I mean, maybe this is not going to be the most popular response, but I will say that I think sometimes you have to join a system to change a system, right? I'm very proud of my friend Tanya Sriracha, for instance. She's a young writer that I'm young. I'm not anymore, but I know her. I knew her when she started, right when she started. Now she has a show called Vida, right? Um, Tanya, I've known Tanya since the very beginning, since the first part of this journey. She had to write on a lot of really shitty, bad shows in order to finally get her own show. I wrote a movie that everybody makes fun of, which was not my finest hour, but I stuck with the movie all the way 24 drafts, 6 producers fired. Everybody got fired on that movie except me. And it was an adaptation of Sense and Sensibility. It's called From Prada to Nada, and it's a big, huge streamer, right? It's like on Netflix, and I still get residual checks for it. But listen, like I learned how to write a movie. I learned how to be on set. I learned how to work with actors. I learned how to work with the director. I learned the industry where I could make money in, where I could eventually help change things, right? So in some ways, when I teach like a screenwriting class, I know what I'm talking about because I followed a film for 5 years all the way through that didn't do that well. Well, it didn't do that well initially, and now it's done really well, right? Because when it first got released, it made like $3 million, so that's a dud. But since then, it's made so many millions because kids, tweens, it's a tween film. They watch it and they watch it and they watch it and they watch it, right? And so it's like been all over the world. So in a way, some people might say to me, well, God, that movie was like sort of terrible. It was supposed to be shot in East LA. At the last minute, Lionsgate decided to shoot it in Mexico and make it look like East LA. Anybody who's been to East LA knows this is not East LA, right? But there are certain fights that you do in order to get indoors. And I will say that as a theater maker, there have been many doors that have been opened for me in places where I'm not welcomed or where I have to make a space, not only for myself, but for everybody else to prop it open for other people to enter. So sometimes you're not fully proud or happy about the experience, right? So like when I hear you say that, I think, well, yeah, one of the challenges that I have is that I am in one of the whitest I was about to cuss. I'm in one of the widest disgusting industries, right? Where the leadership in Los Angeles County alone is like white supremacy. It's terrible. It doesn't represent our of the city of Los Angeles. Our theater community does not represent in diversity the theater of Los Angeles. The leadership that run these theaters.
Mhm.
That's not good. But my job is to get in that door and very kindly, with a lot of like urgent pushing, make change happen, right? And that's part of what the way I think I have to do it. Sometimes you gotta like bang on the door, sometimes you gotta protest, and sometimes you go in very nicely and you prop the door open very slyly and quietly, and you get in there and you start hiring people that are going to make a change, right? So
Right.
I think, yeah, like representation is so hard. Like there's this beautiful I haven't seen it, but what is it, Penny Dreadful? Is that what it is? The new show
Oh yeah, yeah.
that's about Mexicans, right? But it's not written by Mexicans, and so there's a lot of controversy about it. I mean, how do you counter something like that, right? How do you try to get your own show on the air? And I think it is about getting people in production, getting showrunners, everything. You try to infiltrate an industry so that eventually you can tell the most authentic story that you can tell. It's really hard. I mean, I'm not going to lie. Most of these industries are not run by our people, right? And so getting people into places of power, or at least into positions where you can actually express yourself, is really, really hard. It's really, really hard. I worked on this film, and everybody on the film that gave me notes had no idea what a Latino was, but they all had an opinion about us. So you'd have to sit there and you'd say, is this the fight? Is this where I want to have the fight? Or is this person not worth having the fight with, right? Because this person could stop the project, but I'm going to keep going. And I'm going to be very nice right now. And they're going to tell me to change this, but I'm not going to change it. Yeah. Or I'm going to write it in a way that they're not going to realize it's not changed, right? And so you start to figure out that there are many, many ways of subverting systems, right? And so as artists, we're not just creating our work. Well, that would be a wonderful, wonderful privilege. We're creating our work, and we're also creating the community, and we're also creating the situation for the story to be told. That is what's exhausting about art making. Art making in itself is a beautiful, amazing, extraordinary, spiritual, once again, experience. But that's not always what I'm doing. Sometimes what I'm doing is trying to create a situation where I can get the story just to be told.
Yeah.
That's hard. That's hard.
No, that was a very practical answer. I appreciate it. I mean, it wasn't grandstanding. It wasn't like we gotta storm the beaches. No, it was cunning.
Well, because also, I think that, you know, honestly, and this is another fight I have with a lot of friends, my friends. You can't do it without white people. You got to build allyship. You got to get allies, and we gotta link up with the Black community and the Asian community. We gotta link up with the communities that are having success, so that we're able to get ourselves in the door as a larger political force. But if we keep sort of siphoning ourselves off, that's where the problem is. And I need, you know, frankly, the people that have made the most impact for me in my career have been white people who believe in diversity, who believe in equality, who believe, you know, in the same things that we believe in, that believe that we should live in a country where many stories need to be told, right? And so, yeah, I'm going to seek out those allies who are going to allow or explore, or going to use their own power, their own privilege to help move these stories along. That's important.
So Gaseous Midnight asks, do you miss the old Midnight Special?
Oh my God, Wolfman Jack. Of course, it's like my whole life. That, Huggy Boy, and you know, oh my God, and Art LeBeau. You know, I was just talking about how Art LeBeau introduced me to Rosie from Rosie and the Originals, Angel Baby, and how that just, oh my God, it was like amazing. Yeah, and you know, I wrote a poem many years ago about Minnie Riperton, and the husband sent me a note saying, my daughter Maya Rudolph wants to meet you, because he wrote a poem for her mother.
Wow.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, but you know, that's my period. Those were my jams. Yeah, I stayed up till midnight to watch that damn show, man. And you know, I didn't know much about like white music, so I only knew Black music. And then on one of those shows, Joni Mitchell was on, and it was like, wow, but I had never actually heard Joni Mitchell till she was on like that show.
Yeah. Rick Nahara asks, do you remember Latins Anonymous?
Of course. So, you know, one of the founders of Latin Anonymous just passed away about 15 days ago, the great Diane Rodriguez, who I worked with for 10 years at the Mark Taper Forum downtown at the Music Center. We ran a program called the Latino Theater Initiative, and Latin Anonymous was very important. You know, Culture Clash, Latin Anonymous, Chicano Secret Service, a lot of amazing comedy troupes that were happening in the 80s and 90s. They were giving voice. And so, yeah, Latin Anonymous had a really brilliant run at LATC downtown in the 90s, early 90s. And they were very, very important. They were doing, you know, really political and very funny theater. And they've all gone on to amazing careers. Luisa Lechin, Chris Franco, Armando Molina. The three of them have all had extraordinary careers.
Yeah. Lupe Carrasco Cardona says, oh my God, I teach his plays.
Oh, I'm sorry. Thank you, Lupe. Thank you for doing that. I have a book, finally. I've never had a book of my plays. And I have my own book coming out this year from a company in London called Methuen Press, Methuen. And they're publishing my 3 Greek plays together in an anthology. It comes out the end of the year. But I'm really excited because it finally gets to something that I could bring into the academy into universities.
Mhm. So Lupe teaches over at the Ed Roybal in downtown.
Oh yeah, I know it really well.
Yeah.
I
So
know it well.
that's not too far from where your your story begins, and you're being taught.
And you know what's so funny? I was just at the Ed Roybal because there's a guy named Felipe Agredano who, so I was not raised Catholic like most people. I was raised in the Pentecostal apostolic tradition,
Mhm.
storefront churches, and he was in the Alleluia too. So every time I see him when I go to visit his class, he says "Paz de Cristo, hermano," and it always makes me
Uh, all right.
laugh.
Tell us about the Greek plays. What made you set these giant Greek tragedies in Los Angeles with a bunch of Mexicans running around? What inspired that idea?
Well, like I was saying, everyone has a kind of fact attached to it. Also, Electricidad was the first one, and I really, I had, so I do this thing called these ofrendas, these offerings. So I've been very, very lucky in my life because I have been supported by big foundations, and one of them that I was supported was I was given a MacArthur Genius Prize, which is ridiculous because I'm not a genius, but whatever. And I was given this prize, and one of the things I did was I gave away the money. And one of the ways that I gave away the money, because I didn't need the money. I know now I look at
Don't
it.
give
Oh
away
my
the
God.
money.
I know I'm a fool. I'm a fool. But
Uh,
what I did was I needed access. I didn't need money. I needed access. I know how to live as a poor person, and I just needed the access as an artist. So what I did was I would go and do these offerings for free because I had money to do free gigs, right? Free poetry workshops. And I did one with 12 to 17-year-old girls in like a youth authority program. And I met a little girl who had murdered her mother. And if you know the story of Electra, the story of Electra is about a little girl who murders her mother. And I thought, oh my God, 1,700 years later, and we're still stuck in the same, the poverty of the violence of poverty, right? We're still stuck in the same place. Why? So that question of that play was really, why are we still here? Oedipus is really about why are we going to prisons? Why are our young men, why are our brown and black brothers disproportionately spending so much of their times in state prisons? And then Mojada was even a worse fact, which was more than half of all women who cross the southern border into the US undocumented are assaulted, usually raped. So what a terrible price to pay to come to this country, right? So these facts feed plays about today. All I do is take the Greek, I take the ancient, and try to connect the thread of them to connect us to a larger world theater. I want us as a people to see ourselves in the larger world theater. It wasn't for me. I didn't become the writer. I think that I feel that the power that I have as a writer now until I finally left Pico Union. And that happened way late in my life, right? It wasn't until I was a poet and I was touring around the country, sleeping on, people's floors and stuff. And then in the performance art world, I started going to Latin America. I started going to the Americas, Canada, and then I started going to Europe. And that changed the way I saw the world because people were very open in Canada to Chicanos. People are very open in France, in England to Chicanos. And so I started to see that there was something very unique and extraordinary about us in a context that wasn't here, right? Where here we might be seen one way, and another place we're seen completely different. And that's really important, I think, to broaden, to examine how you live in the world. So I am a citizen of the world, right? So I can take my community, I can take Pico Union with me to the larger regions. I could take Pico Union to the bigger place, right? And that's important too, to give us the power and the voice to be to speak to a larger audience.
So tell us about this. I mean, the first one is the Electra adaptation. Where was it staged? I mean, when you presented to people, what did they say?
Well, it's gone through like a lot of this. Is on its 48th production, so it's been all over the country. It's been all over the world now, which is kind of amazing. It's had big, fat productions, and then it's had really small productions. I write in Spanglish because that is a language that I know very well. So a lot of that play gets done at a lot of colleges in the American Southwest, where there's a lot of Latino kids, right, who can pick up the language. Oedipus was done most recently off Broadway in New York last season, and I think has had another kind of life, and that's on its 18th production. And the Mojada was just presented at the Public Theater in New York last season too, and that's on like its 8th or 9th production. So in a kind of amazing, extraordinary way, the people that are discovering this play are not just the people from here, but people from all over. I think most of the time people have a problem. The biggest problem people have in my play is the title of Mojada. Why did I use that title? Because it's such a derogatory term, right? So people have a lot of trouble with that. But I wanted to take that word and I wanted to empower that word in the same way that I think we empower the word queer, right? A derogatory term for us that we turn around and throw back into people's faces, right? So I think that was really important. It's funny, like in some places, people are very, like Oedipus had probably its biggest production was in Chicago. And, you know, Chicago is like the 3rd largest Latino town in the US, right? Latinos just really flocked to it in Chicago. And I really was telling a Chicago story. Electricidad was really more like San Francisco was a big place where it was very accepted. And then Mohabbat's had an amazing journey because it's really been in New York where people have like kind of really taken, and it's nominated this season for a theater prize called the Drama Desk Award. So like in a kind of strange way, you know, I think a lot like, you know who RuPaul is, the drag queen? He always says, what you think of me is none of my business. And I always think like, oh, I wonder what the audience is thinking. And I think, well, you know what? It really isn't any of my business what people walk away from. I know what the story I want to tell. I know the lesson that I want to learn. I know the thing I'm challenging myself. But I'm always surprised to see how people enter plays that are so not their experience, right?
Yeah.
It's amazing.
So do you think that there's a kind of a struggle to tell the stories of Los Angeles, right? And not, I mean, to tell specifically the stories of Mexican LA. That even though everyone's conscious of it, everyone's aware of it, everyone knows it, everyone knows about it, nobody wants to tell that story. Nobody, I mean, like at least over there, or the you know, to get it on the national stage, that's kind of an uphill battle, no?
Yeah, always an uphill battle. You know, the reason, honestly, the reason I think I got such a good reception off Broadway this year was everybody kept saying, why are you doing this play about like a woman who crosses over from Mexico into the US, and it's really about LA, right? But what I always do is a lot of research, as I was saying. And I realized, I started doing the research, New York City has 350,000 Mexicans. That's a lot. 15,000 of those Mexicans speak our ancient language, Nahuatl, right? They speak the old ancient language. By 2025, supposedly, Mexicans will be the leading Latino population in New York City over Puerto Ricans and Dominicans. That's huge. That's how many Mexicans are there. So I wrote, this Medea that I wrote takes place in an area of Queens called Corona. Corona is like the East LA now of New York, right? Of the boroughs. Corona is over 50% Mexican. It used to be all Puerto Rican. It's next to Jackson Heights. So all of a sudden you're starting to see that our people are everywhere, and especially in New York City. And my favorite fact that would always freak people out is the top 3 sous chefs in the top 3 sushi restaurants in New York. They were all trained by a famous sushi master, a guy named Nobu, was a famous chef, are all Mexican. The top 3 sushi chefs in New York of the highest, most expensive restaurants are all Mexican. That is where we are at. We are everywhere, right? But it's hard for people to acknowledge that we are everywhere, right? So it's hard for who knew this fact that soon we will be the majority population in New York, because our migration is huge, right? Our migration is gigantic, but if you don't see, if you don't acknowledge, you don't acknowledge, you don't take those stories into consideration. So my job is not to tell every story. My job is just to tell one story. Right? My job is just to tell you one story of our people in hopes that you can get a sense that this larger narrative is larger and bigger and telling something about how complex and dynamic we are. We're everywhere. Every city I go to now, and sometimes I'm surprised at the cities. I love going through Texas because, the plays do really well in Texas, but of course we're everywhere in Texas, right? So yeah, that's our story. Our story is the story of travel.
So what do you think? Do you think there's larger social forces at play that are seeking to deny the significance of the growth of our population?
Absolutely. I mean, well, let's talk about it, right? It's like racism, right? It's the look what's going on in our country right now. It's like, it's the people who are dying to get to the beach and not isolate are not it's not about the beach. It's about this perception that they can't have the thing they want, right? It's about this perception that that there's a privilege, right? That's above everybody else. And I think that's something that's really fascinating to me about our culture right now, is the way we're seen in the culture. I love all the people I work with. I love the white people I work with, but that's white supremacy.
Mhm.
I work in a city that is majority Latino, and none of the cultural leadership of our city is Latino. That's white supremacy.
Yeah.
That's racism,
Yeah.
right? They're very nice people. They're very kind people. They mean well, but we live in an apartheid.
Yeah.
We live in a culture where we're not allowed to lead ourselves. That's a problem. That's a huge problem. And you know why it's a problem? Because when you go see a season of plays in a theater, it's decided by a group of white people who
Yeah.
mean well, but the go-to for them is always going to be their own experience, right?
Mhm.
So that's the problem, is nobody likes to share. Because to share, the idea they think is that they have to give up something rather than expand something. And I
Yeah.
think that's the big problem.
I mean, like, yeah. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I think about the success that Luis Rodriguez had recently with at Josefina's place. I mean, that was just
Amazing, right? And that play should be in a bigger place. It was wonderful there, but it should be in a bigger place because that ran forever and it could have run even longer, right?
yeah.
So the thing is, we're hungry to see ourselves represented everywhere, in film, on stage, in music, everywhere, right? Yeah, we have to either control our own forces, or we have to infiltrate and change the dynamics of how power works in this country,
Yeah.
because it's really about power. And so race is really about fear, right? It's the fear of the other, and that's what this president stokes, is a fear of the other.
Yeah.
Yeah, so this is like, it's no surprise. There's no big revelation here. It's that you have to work within side of systems. So I think, what I feel like is really, really important about what I do as an artist is I make my work, but I'm also a politician and I'm also a community builder. So my job is not only to write the play, but it's to bring the audience, and then also to tap nicely on the door, and then to push the door down, or to be firm and gentle, and then sometimes call people out on their bullshit, right?
Mhm.
All of those are tactics that you have to use in our communities, because we need to have change.
Yeah.
We need to have change. It's not enough to just have one show. Well, the numbers of our people demand to have many different experiences that reflect the diversity of who we are as a people, right? Like, many years ago, I worked on this project in the Armenian community. And when you go out and meet the Armenian community in Glendale, it's gigantic. And the thing that's so beautiful is that you meet the traditionalists, then you meet the avant-gardists, and then you meet the like crazy mainstream crowd. You meet everybody, and it's a big enough community that it can support a lot of different ideas, a lot of different expressions.
Yeah.
That's what we need to be. That's what we need to be doing, and that's what teaching is, right? Is that I love a mainstream writer, I love an avant-garde writer, I love a writer who's just discovering themselves. But every writer is different, and so I don't want you to fall into some sort of cookie cutter, because that's the only way that you're going to be accepted. You're going to be accepted because you're the most unique, amazing, extraordinary, authentic thing that exists, and you are the new. People got to catch up to you. How about that? How about thinking about
Yeah.
your career in that way, right? Stop thinking that you have to fit into somebody else's view, but people need to catch up to you. And your job is just to move towards what you think is excellent for you. And be honest with yourself about the kind of writing you do and the kind of work you do and how you will do the work. Sometimes you have to do the work yourself. Sometimes you have to produce yourself. Sometimes you have to do that, right? And that's just part of the ball game because of the world we live in. In a kinder, more just world, there are extraordinary artists among us who deserve the kind of accolades that other people get. But that's not the world we live in.
Agreed. Gina Pacheco says in Cicero, just outside Chicago, students and parents in the largest high school district in the state read Medina, and then attended Medea, and Luis and Juan Villa came to school to talk with the high school students for a couple hours. Luis's openness with the students had a huge impact on them. We could do all that with Grand Fronts, but the ongoing discussion, they're having ongoing discussion, how to get Luis's productions to be seen by even more working folks in the community.
That was one of the most extraordinary experiences I ever had. Cicero was amazing. And I remember going to that school and Juan Villa, I took Juan Villa with me and we had the most amazing time and it was beautiful. Yeah, and then they came to the theater. It was important for me not to do the play at the school, but to have the students come and see it in a professional production because they're entitled to see beautiful, crafted, gorgeous works of art, right? That's also something we should do. We should go to museums. We should go to theaters. We should go to those spaces because those spaces you pay for with your tax dollars. Those are your spaces too. LACMA is your space, right? That is your space too. So you should demand to see your art there. But yeah, that was an amazing experience. I learned so much on that because it didn't really cost that much in the end to get a funder to give every student a copy of Medea. Yeah. And they read it in Spanish. Amazing, right? So cool.
So cool. Luis, this has been so cool. I really appreciate you, Luis, for giving us being so generous with your time and energy and sharing all these experiences and being so open and upfront with and just honest and sharing so much of your genius and craftless. And you are a genius. We're gonna drop the links below to all the ways we can follow you. So tell us one more time, how can we follow you? How can we keep up with your work? Where can we get the plays? Where can we get your stuff?
Well, the book, it comes out at the end of the year, and it's called The Plays of Luis Alfaro, so you can't miss it. Just look for it's already like pre-sale on Amazon. But next year, I'm doing some really interesting things. I'm doing a play with Bob Baker Marionette Studio, which is used to be in Echo Park, and now they're in Eagle Rock. And I'm doing a play about a young Chicana puppet that stutters, and it's going to be at the Geffen Theater in Westwood. So that's going to be interesting. And I'm writing a play about homelessness. For the Mark Taper Forum, and then I'm writing a piece about a Chicano car salesman for South Coast Rep. So all that's like in the process for next year. But look for me next year because I have a lot of projects coming up.
Yeah. Well, look from there. Luis has been fantastic. So for those watching, this has been another presentation of the Dawson for the Arts. Dawson for the Arts is a not-for-profit based in Pomona, California. Art lab as well as art gallery, and this has been an hour with Luis Alfaro. So far we got a triumphant of Luis's. We got a few more Luis's to go and to develop our ultimate Luis collection. So perfect. Thank you, Luis Alfaro. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, my friend. We'll see you soon. Thank you. Be well.